Everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night from wherever you tuned in this 8th episode of the Climate Culture Podcast, where we had promised that in this particular episode we'll delve deeper into the idea of people, politics, and of course, land rights. Now, this is a very tricky topic to discuss, and considering that we're now going into the realities of what most people have been able and willing to talk about with regards to the carbon market and carbon credits. Many people are already taking a number of non-stands against or for carbon markets, with a main emphasis on how these are handled. Of course, everything that is being done here is done because there are people, and these people, wherever there are people, there is always the opportunity for conversations, and these conversations can be defined as political by and by. But before I get into it, I believe this conversation is deeper than how I can mainly put it and how I can discuss it myself. There are other multiple platforms through which people are already trying to engage and create conversations and bring around arguments. And these platforms can be accessed freely through digital platforms, and I would invite you to go and look at the carboncredits.com. There are a number of people who are analyzing the legal groundings for the carbon market conversation, and this is public information out there. But the climate culture will seem to really look at the connection between people, and mainly the young people, how they feel about, how they want to talk about climate change, climate action, and how they want to move into the future with hope and inspiration. So here goes nothing. Now, what are people saying? So people say that the carbon market has been designed to fail. That is what people say. And a number of projects have already been pointed out as having been failed carbon markets projects, several of which are in the nature-based categories, where you find that some people claim that by planting trees, for instance, they are sequestering carbon, but in reality, the tree counts are not clearly accounted for. Even with these tree counts, when they're clearly accounted for, you're not certain which number of trees capture what amount of carbon. That is one. Two, costs. So there is no real defined cost or pricing for carbon credits. So some projects have charged $30 per ton of carbon sequestered. Others are charging $80 per ton of carbon sequestered, and this has no real international standard. And as we had earlier indicated, there actually needs to be a clear definition of how much a ton costs and who buys those particular carbon credits, and once they buy, how do we monitor that the resources that have been flushed into these particular programs help to sequester as much carbon as possible. So I'll use an example. So we have a company A. So this company operates airlines. So these airlines, they are known to use jet fuel and stuff. They are known to be high polluters. So as they pollute, so some of these companies have found a platform for which they can easily pay for the carbon that they are getting into the atmosphere, not just carbon but other greenhouse gases. We know is a greenhouse gas, other oxides of nitrogen, as well as CFCs, among others. So this company pays a project, say a project in my village. So they pay us money so that we can plant trees that will sequester carbon. Now, this company might not have the ability to come and look at how the number of trees you've planted and even have the data around how much carbon they have sequestered. But they record that they have already sequestered. Whether the money allocated for this program goes into a carbon sequestration project and or not. And it's happened, and these complaints have been raised by climate activists who are questioning some of these particular investments. The third thing is land. So imagine a government negotiates now with this airline that it will implement projects for carbon sequestration, and then it goes to a village and says that in a village ABC we have set aside land for forestry. So this land is defined as a forest zone. Then the community which used the land for other purposes earlier on, for instance, herding of cattle, among others, does not completely agree with such government initiatives. So there have been a number of issues arising from the idea that governments, institutions, then it's not just mentioned governments, but institutions of government and non-government forms are setting aside land without community engagement, or where community is engaged, these communities do not understand the benefits that accrue from these particular projects. And this has caused a lot of issues with a recent petition in Masai Mara, where there are a number of community members complaining that they're being denied access to land that they were used to grazing into. And maybe the way the program was designed did not clearly provide a platform for conversations with the community on how this project would be rolled out. And it's happening across the board, mainly in African countries, and it's causing a lot of problems. Now, earlier on, I had mentioned something around 40% for land-based projects and 25% for non-land-based projects, all going towards community. So one would ask, how does this go? How does this happen? So that's where the interesting madness starts. So we all understand government and other institutions have roles in ensuring that communities are developed and they are provided opportunities for prosperity. In these particular cases, most of these agreements for carbon market projects only include things like developing schools, developing roads, among others, which is fine. But one would ask, you want to create adaptation, climate adaptation for these mostly rural communities. What are their urgent needs? So there is a conversation that most of these rural communities do not actually get to say what their urgent needs are, and they might be shortchanged in all contracts and programs around carbon markets. Lastly, and most importantly, carbon markets should open up opportunities. And in this particular sense, I would like to really talk about what about the farmers, who some of which have been told they can set aside 10% of their land for growing of trees. So what about them? How do they get completely encompassed into the whole conversation? There has been a failure in this particular line because in most instances, you will find gaps in how farmers are engaged and so on and so forth. But these gaps are actually created by systems that are such that most of the smallholder farmers do not have proper land holding documentation. Most of them do not understand how to register both voluntarily and involuntarily for such carbon market projects. And it causes a big problem. And this is a problem that needs addressing both at the community level and also at the institutional level. I understand while I have used a very medium tone that may drive this point as quite non-significant. These are some of the basis for rejection of and or the absolute ignorance on carbon markets and carbon credits. I speak as a young man who is also taking action within a community where I have seen these problems firsthand, actually live these problems firsthand. So I know if they're not addressed, we might have platforms for chaos and conflicts rather than solutions, as we are hoping. We can always have this conversation for as long as we want, but if we really need to create platforms where there is success in the implementation of carbon credits and carbon markets, there has to be a real balance on how we deal with people, how we handle the politics that come around, and of course, most importantly, the issue of land rights. This is an issue that has been recurringly a problem for rural communities over and over again. So what goes as we move forward? This episode of the Climate Culture Podcast has been enabled by the amazing support of the USAID through Kenyatta University under the Young African Leadership Initiative, and also the Youth for Climate program, which is implemented by UNDP, funded through the Italian Ministry of Environment and Energy Security. Thank you so much, our partners, and thank you, our viewers, for tuning in. See you next time.